Hello, everyone, and welcome to Just DAO It, the podcast for people starting DAOs. I'm Adam Miller, and I'm your host. I'm the CEO of MyDAO, which provides legal entity solutions for DAOs. And prior to starting MyDAO, I did consulting for people starting and operating DAOs. This is the first of 2 episodes this week. In this episode, we'll cover recent DAO news with our guest, and then later in the week, we will go deeper into an interview with her. So first, let's welcome our guest, Deepa. It's awesome having you here on Just DAO It. Would you please give a brief introduction to yourself and what makes you an authority on DAOs?
Thank you so much, Adam, for having me on this show. I'm Deepa, and I'm building ImpactDAO Media. It's a decentralized media org. You can think of it as bankless DAO, but we're exclusively focused on ImpactDAO. So ImpactDAOs are decentralized organizations that are using Web3 technology to do good. So their sole purpose is to have a positive impact on the planet or the people. So my focus is exclusively on impact DAOs, and we recently conducted an intensive research and published a book, which is the definitive guide to impact DAOs. So I think that makes me super authority on impact DAOs.
Yeah. So if you wrote the book on DAOs or Impact DAOs, then that definitely counts. And I met Deepa at MCon, which is a conference just for leaders in the DAO space. And I can say with certainty that she is an authority on DAOs. So great to have you here again. Thanks for joining. First up is the Just DAO It news report, where I will summarize this week's stories for the audience and for our guest. And then Deepa, you and I will both share our reactions to the story. Do we agree or disagree? And what makes it relevant for people starting DAOs? The first story of the week is from CoinDesk, and the headline is, "Do you believe in second chances? Another DAO is raising funds to buy a copy of the US Constitution. Inspired by Constitution DAO's attempt last year, the unaffiliated Constitution DAO 2 received $34,000 in public contributions on its first day." It's very cool because Constitution DAO was one of the first DAOs that I think really put DAOs into the spotlight last year. Got written up in major media, came really close to succeeding in buying a copy of the Constitution with the $48 million that it raised in a week, which was incredible. And I think really highlighted one of the things DAOs are really good at, which is quickly raising money to be allocated later. So I think it is exciting that there's another Constitution DAO. I feel like actually $34,000 is not a lot for its first day compared to the first one that raised an average of 7 million a day for about 7 days. But hopefully we will see some success here. So definitely recommend people check that out if they are interested in buying the Constitution. What do you think, Deepa?
I think that's when I first heard about DAOs, when Constitution DAO was mobilizing money on the internet last year, because 2021 was all about NFTs and DAOs were like there, but not really there, and that's when they really put the spotlight on DAOs. So I think it's incredibly great. And I'm sure they've gotten smarter this time, I think if I'm not mistaken, I think their only downfall was the fact that they announced the bidding price and then somebody outbid them. That's what I understood from the story last year. So maybe this time they'll be smarter about how they approach the entire bidding process.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, that guy, who knows how high he would have gone, but certainly the fact that DAOs are generally so open, anyone who's paying attention to this auction will probably know how much money the DAO has going in, unless they have some kind of off-chain line of credit, which could be an interesting approach. But yeah, it will be interesting to see if they're able to buy it this time. And it looks like this new DAO is actually a coalition of 16 separate DAOs, which includes a couple DAOs whose founders we've had on the show. One is Juicebox, another one is Moon DAO. And it does include People DAO, which is related to the first Constitution DAO. I'm sure they're using Juicebox to raise money, which is an awesome tool people should check out if they've never heard of it. And will be interesting to see what they're able to achieve this time. The second story of the week is from Cointelegraph, and the headline is, "Remote work triggers move to DAOs in the post-pandemic world, says survey." A survey from a sample of the general US public suggests that millennials are more likely to join a DAO than any other age group, and millennials and Gen Z workers are far more in favor of joining DAOs and working remotely than other Americans. So very cool article here. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone in the world of DAOs that what we're building represents the future of work. And not all of the future of work will necessarily be DAOs, but certainly some of what's happening here in terms of having leadership and governance structures that are more distributed, I think appeals to younger people, as does just kind of pushing back against the TradFi or Web2 world that they're growing up in, where they can see the negative outcomes, whether that's the FTX, where one person can walk away with $16 billion, or other centralized institutions that they see. So yeah, exciting to see that Gen Z. Oh, and this was interesting too. So another quote from the article is that Gen Z respondents most accurately defined a DAO compared to respondents from other age groups. And a majority of Gen Z participants defined DAOs as a revolutionary movement changing the future of work. So I think on average, from a study I saw a few months ago, or a couple months ago, only 5% of Americans, for example, had even heard of a DAO. But a majority of Gen Z is ready to say that DAOs are going to change the world. So there's clearly a massive shift here happening that's starting with the younger generations, and like most other trends, the older generations will catch on soon as well. What do you think, Deepa?
Yeah, I totally love this piece of news because I've been saying this for so long that DAOs are the future of work. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the space and to be here because we are living the future right now and we're defining the future. We are the future, the leaders. Basically, what we do today is going to define how people are going to work tomorrow. And I'm so glad to see that this article appeared. And as part of a study, we spoke to about 30 DAO builders. A lot of them were contributors, not just founders. So it was just interesting to get that perspective because they are the ones who are now working in this new economy and they're getting paid in crypto. It's a totally different parallel system. And I think it does allow a lot of flexibility to people. They can choose their style of work, where they want to work from. By default, DAOs are internet native, so they are distributed, they're remote. Nobody expects you to be in the office. You can work from a beach or wherever. And I think it really appeals to the new generation. Also, the fact the power is decentralized, everybody has a say in the matter. Like people are more value aligned and they're looking for different, a different organization structure which appeals to their values. And for a lot of them it'll be the first time that they can earn in crypto, like maybe that's the way they start owning, besides the regular fiat currency. Like this is an opportunity for them to start earning and diversify their income in different assets, so I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's very cool. And even the subtle change from a traditional company to a DAO, in a traditional company, you don't get equity unless you're either very early in the project or you're very high up in the organization. And tokens are not necessarily the same thing as equity, but they do give you those governance rights. And the fact that in most DAOs, every contributor at every level gets tokens that give you some amount of governance rights over the entire organization. And even if that's a really small number, even if it's just an arbitrarily 5 tokens, 10 tokens out of maybe millions or tens of millions or billions, that's still, I think, very different. When you tell everyone in the organization that the more you do, the more say you get, versus the more you do, maybe we'll give you a raise, but that doesn't mean you get to vote on the board or as a shareholder. So I think that's one of the things that Gen Z really is responding to here, is the fact that they get some say rather than none.
Also, I think it's a better alternative to the gig economy right now. Like a lot of them, for instance, the ones who are doing undergrad, or they try to substitute their expenses by taking up like a Uber job or something like that, which is so intensive. Like they have to be on the road, take risks, like look at the phone while riding their bikes or whatever. I feel like this is far more meaningful work because, especially when it
Mm.
comes to the impact DAO space, since the community is around a shared purpose and the purpose is to do great, and they can earn through bounty systems. They can be at home much more relaxed than being on the road and during all extreme conditions and trying to get the food to the person. Like it's, I think it's just a far more better alternative to what exists today in terms of flexibility and extra income.
Yep. Awesome. All right. The next story is from Coin Geek, and the headline is "The Law is Coming for DAOs." The United Kingdom Law Commission announced in November it's seeking views on how decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, can be characterized and fully incorporated into the laws of England and Wales. Really exciting, as audience probably knows by now. My company works with the Marshall Islands on legislation related to DAOs, and it's always exciting to see more governments are recognizing that what's happening here is meaningful and is going to have an impact, and therefore they need to look at how their laws, treat these organizations. And so, happy to see that the UK is coming to this realization as well. There's some really positive quotes in the article from government officials about what they see as the prospects here. And one of the sub headlines in the article is a distributed general partnership, which I think is a really insightful recognition of something that's true about most DAOs, which is that if you don't incorporate your DAO in any way, that DAO is going to be seen by most legal systems as a general partnership, right? It doesn't matter whether you call yourself a DAO or a company or a commune or an onion. If you're a group of people that's coming together for a similar purpose, the law will generally see you as a general partnership, and that has implications in terms of how you'll be treated by the law. So, if a DAO doesn't do anything, that's how they'll be treated by the law, and so they should at least consider whether they want to choose a particular type of legal entity so that they can be treated a particular way rather than just fitting into the default. And so that will be one of the things that the government of the UK looks into here. And this is actually a pretty good article going into a lot of related legal issues. Talks about UkiDAO, talks about the SEC and securities implications, talks about Wyoming as well. So really good article for people to check out. I'm curious, Deepa, coming from the ImpactDAO space, are people looking at legal entities? Are they
Oh, yes.
considering,
Definitely,
yeah,
because
okay.
it what it does is that if you register yourself, especially in the US, as 501(c)(3), which then you can start getting philanthropic donations for your DAOs. Right now, they're just limited to crypto donations because crypto people are in alignment with what they're doing, and whichever way they've structured, like. Even if they're not able to give any tax concession, crypto people still would prefer giving to DAOs. But once they can formalize themselves as an entity and can get that tax status, then they can extend those benefits to larger donors. And I think this would really help them raise far more money to pursue their mission. So I think it's a really great news, and I'm glad UK is taking steps and leading because many other countries will follow the suit. It's very important that we start recognizing the space and have legal structures to recognize it, the one that fits the ethos. Because even if you register your DAO as a company, like it's you need to have board members, and like there are different ways the DAOs are structured. So it's really great that UK is looking into coming up with a structure to recognize and laws to recognize DAOs as an entity that is in alignment with their ethos.
Awesome. All right. The next story is actually a tweet, and the tweet is from Dr. Nick A. And the tweet is DAOs should think more like institutions than companies. Institutions do a thing and do it forever. Companies do a thing and extract value for shareholders. Institutions provide a service and can be profitable, but their goal is to be around forever and not cash out. This is the difference in the follow-up tweet. He says between finite and infinite games. So thinking from like a game theory perspective, I actually don't agree with this tweet. I think it's insightful to consider the difference between finite and infinite games for sure. For example, the difference between a project and a product, or a project and a program. As a lot of companies talk about these things, but I think every project can either be temporary or permanent as its goal, and every organization can be either temporary or permanent or somewhere in between. I think it really just depends on the specifics of the situation. And so I think it's a really important thing for every organization, including DAOs, to think about as they're structuring how the organization will operate, how it's funded, how its governance works. But I would say actually that DAOs can be even more flexible than all the set of organizations that are out there today, and so should consider where they fall on any of these spectrum. What do you think, Deepa?
Yeah, I agree, and I don't know what I feel like. As long as you are relevant, you'll exist. The moment you see you are outdated, you will cease to not exist, whether you happen to be an institution or you happen to be a corporate. So DAOs is very important that they stay relevant with the times, and I feel they have that kind of an advantage because new people keep joining the DAO, right? It's not, I mean, the right to entry is easy, it's not that difficult, and new perspectives keep coming in. People globally are joining DAOs, so it's, there's diversity of thoughts, there's diversity of opinions, young people are joining. So I feel like as long as the DAOs pursue to stay relevant in whatever they're trying to do and change with the times, I think they'll continue to exist no matter whether you call them the institution or the corporation. That's just the naming part of things.
Yeah, and that reminds me too. I wonder if actually institutions are a bad idea in the sense that their goal, if it is indeed their goal, is to stay around forever. Because if you say, I'm doing something now and I'm going to do this exact same thing forever, aren't you implicitly ignoring the fact that reality can change and the needs of the world around you can change? So, like, I'm thinking about in DC, here in the States where I live, all these like big buildings that do this, with thousands of people doing the same thing they did 150 years ago or 50 years ago, with not enough attention paid to whether that's really what they should still be doing today. Even though institutions are so valuable in our society, and at least in the States and in many other countries are very effective at doing what they do, I wonder if actually no organization should ever have the goal of necessarily being permanent, but should have the goal of achieving something in the world. And if that continues to be valuable to achieve that thing, so be it. And if not, maybe then you become less permanent at that time.
Yeah, and for instance, like even colleges, which are institutions that have been around for so long, the whole, people are taking a different approach to education. They are studying online. They study by being on the job. Like it's changing, and in the future, if these institutions don't evolve with the changing needs and the requirements of people, then they'll be outdated. People wouldn't want to spend that much money going through a college when they can just
Yeah.
YouTube everything that they want to learn.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess if I think about institutions like universities, they probably would say they want to be around forever and they want to adjust to the times as opposed to just disappearing if the times change. But even though I'd feel the same way about my own university, that feels like probably like a human bias to want your thing to live forever, when in fact, and maybe that's even just built into life, right? I mean, life's purpose is kind of to survive. And so it's probably natural for us to feel that way about our organizations. But at the same time, seems like kind of arbitrary decision that we make rather than just saying, well, maybe at some point Harvard or MIT's time is done and we should put the $20 billion of the endowment back into massive online learning for everyone rather than, great in-person learning for a small group of people.
And it's happening already. So they have these courses online that you can just take and upgrade your skills and your knowledge. So it's all happening as we speak. So I
Yeah.
think nobody means to be permanent, like as long as you don't if you continue to stay in your current form and don't upgrade with times, then you're totally dead.
Yep. Yep. All right. Next story is from Story Guild, which is hosted on paragraph.xyz, which looks like a Web3 publishing and newsletter platform, which I'm probably going to check out more later. It looks cool. And the author is miyakoda.eth. And the headline is Who are crypto Twitter's favorite DAOs? We asked crypto Twitter who their favorite DAOs are, and the results are in. Last week, we asked crypto Twitter who their favorite DAOs are. All right. And this article mentions, by the way, that there are over 10,000 DAOs listed on DeepDAO, which is quite an advancement from when there was literally exactly one DAO in 2016, when the first DAO ever was created and then quickly failed. As another story for another day. And by the way, there are even more than 10,000 DAOs, right? 10,000 DAOs are listed on DeepDAO, but I'm personally connected to dozens of DAOs that are not listed on DeepDAO. And so there's certainly tens of thousands more that are not listed there. So I'd say there are probably about 50,000 DAOs or more at this time. Going into what they found in this crypto Twitter thread, polling the world of crypto Twitter for their favorite DAOs, Gitcoin was one of the most popular ones that came up. I'm not surprised because Gitcoin is really cool. It's a successful DAO that I would probably call an impact DAO, although we'll have to turn to you, Deepa, for that. And they're known largely for their grants protocol, which started out a bit centralized in a sense, but even as a centralized organization was driving a huge amount of donations and funding, grants going to crypto projects, and became more decentralized. And I think as a protocol now, other organizations can even use it too for their own purposes. They've developed some really interesting grant decision making, kind of game theoretic things like quadratic
Quadratic funding,
voting.
yeah. I can talk
Yeah,
about Gitcoin because Gitcoin was part of our study. So we had 12 impact DAOs in our study, and Gitcoin was one of the DAOs included in our study. And Gitcoin transitioned from being a tech company. They started out as a tech company in 2017. They transitioned into being a DAO in 2021, May 2021. So they're one of the mature impact DAOs in this space. Who've because they had that history, and then obviously the whole chaos of transitioning a company, a typical company into a DAO. But just this morning, I was on a call with them, and we're going to be participating. Impact Our Media has been one of the few grantees that will be invited to participate in the alpha round, which is their total decentralized grant protocol. And previously, we've raised money from them on their platform. So we're very well tuned with how Gitcoin works, and they use quadratic funding, which basically decides, how the matching grants the Gitcoin raises from the ecosystem should be deployed. So the more you have people donating to you, even if it's $1, you will get more money from Gitcoin rather than one person giving like $1,000. And if that's the only thing that you have, then you won't get so much in quadratic funding. But if you had, like, say, 100 people give you $1, then that's far more valuable because the community is pointing that your project is supported by more people. It's more democratic decision making on funding.
yeah, yeah. And so the quadratic part is really interesting to me because this can also apply to DAO governance processes where you could say, and I don't know,
Like, you could use the
and so
same
yeah,
for your own budgeting. Like, when you are deciding on your budgets for your different work streams in a DAO, you can use a quadratic voting mechanism to figure out what should get approved, basically where the community is pointing more. So yeah, there are far more implications than just funding.
yeah. So could you tell the audience how quadratic voting works?
I'm not so sure about the quadratic voting part of it. I believe it will work on the same system as quadratic funding, but quadratic funding is where it basically apply the grants where the community is signaling more support. So if there are, like, say, two projects, and one project, as I said, raised like $1,000, or say maybe even $10,000 from just two people, while there's another project that just raised $500, maybe from just $500, say, from 2,000 people, with some combination small denominators that they gave. Then that project, even though they've raised less money, but because they had far more people donating to their project, they will get more chunk of the quadratic matching grounds than the one that raised a huge amount of money from, just say, just two people.
Yeah, so one way to think about it inside a DAO, let's say people have different numbers of the DAO's governance token, and what the I think the quadratic formula would say is something like your vote gets counted as something like the log of how many tokens you put up for the vote. So if you put up one token, you get one vote. If you put up 1,000 tokens, you might get like three votes. And so it's a way of allowing people who have more money to still have more influence, but not very much more, right? Barely more. And so that's how you can achieve that outcome of like 10 people putting a total of $1,000 in actually will have more voting power than one person putting in $10,000. And
Yeah,
so whether
it's
you use it for granting or for voting, it's a really, I think it's a really cool democratic innovation, right? Because you could do the same thing with something like a democracy, where let's say it was like $1 one vote, but on a logarithmic scale, well, now even the richest person only gets like 100 votes, right? And everyone gets one vote, and so obviously that
yeah,
has its own
that's right.
potential
and
downsides, but
And quadratic funding was based on a research paper that Vitalik Buterin had written. He had detailed his thoughts on quadratic funding, and that's what Gitcoin embraced and then applied. I think that was the very first use case of quadratic funding.
yeah,
But now with their
cool. So
decentralized platform, anybody can use the solution. and
Hmm.
apply quadratic funding for their own ecosystem brands or whatever, like within the DAO. If you want to manage different budgets or grants, you want to give out grants to different areas of interest that you have as a DAO, you can use their solution to basically apply quadratic funding to
Yep.
that.
Yeah, very cool. Some of the other DAOs that are mentioned by this article, Giveth is one, Metagame is one, and they mention ImpactDAO and your new book. So I thought that was very cool as well.
Oh,
So
that's
of course, people
amazing.
should.
I would love to see this
Yeah.
tweet. I haven't seen it yet, but Metagame, we're going to be working with Metagame. We love Metagame. We love Pete. He was part of the original The DAO and has been in the DAO scene for a very, very long time. And as part of Impact DAO Media's future plans, we're trying to gamify a lot of things, like just, learning about Impact DAOs. Going to use Quest Chain, which is very gamified. And Metagame loves our gamification approach to governance and stuff like that. So we're going to be working really closely in the future.
Awesome. Love it. All right. The next story for today is another tweet. This one's from Daniel Ospina, who's been on this show before early on. And he was one of the founders of Aragon. And he's also a founder now of RNDAO, which is a DAO that is researching DAOs in a very academic manner, as well as incubating professional projects. And the tweet from Daniel is, DAOs have partially failed so far because the approach to creating solutions has been too similar to that of consumer apps. A thread. I'm going to read a few more of these tweets. Consumer apps are built through quickly prototyping your idea, testing, and iterating. Ideas are cheap in this market, and it's all about speed of execution. However, DAOs can be best understood through a deep tech mental model. Hard, complex innovation is needed to make it work. This requires deep thinking and not just fast prototyping. Otherwise, we end up with many solutions that might be tested but don't really work. So I think this is really interesting, right? And the tweet goes on, and people should definitely check it out. But at a high level, what Daniel is suggesting is there's a difference between like the move fast and break things approach of Facebook in their early days, and they seem to have broken some things over time on the way to developing what they were building, versus a more thoughtful approach where you really got to get serious and think about it before you just launch your organization and see what happens and let things break along the way. So I think there's something to this. I mean, Daniel's someone I very much respect in the space, and I think it's a really insightful analysis. I would also just say, again, similar to what I commented on earlier about the other tweet, is that there's no one size fits all approach to starting DAOs or even to developing governance systems. I mean, I think there's some really cool projects that have popped up that have said, hey, like, part of the purpose of this DAO is to experiment with this new governance model we came up with, or this new software tool that we think is cool. And we know it may or may not work, but we're going to learn something from it. And you go give it a try. And so in that case, maybe it makes a little more sense to experiment versus if you're taking, let's say you have a $50 million budget and you want to create an organization that's going to save the rainforest or whatever it is. And you need to pick an organizational model that you're fairly confident will work as a model, then that's probably not the right time to experiment with some new approach to governance or a new, tool for building a DAO. That's probably a time to say, you know what, we either need to use something a little more traditional and well proven, or be very, very thoughtful about what new governance and organizational structure we choose if we're going to do it in the space of DAOs. So I could see
Yeah.
both sides here.
I don't really agree with his tweet because I think Daniel is trying to generalize it. The DAO landscape is so big and there's so many different types of DAOs. There are DeFi DAOs, there are protocol DAOs, DAOs around protocols, there are DAOs around NFTs, there are DAOs around impact, for instance. And each of these DAOs think very differently. And as you said, no one size fits all, and everybody designs it to suit their purposes. And if there have been failures, I would say may have been failures in the more traditional kind of DAOs that came around early on, because it's an experiment, right? Like there's no textbooks written about DAOs, right? You can't read like a business book and say, oh, this is how a DAO should work. Like you get on it and you learn, and it's a process. Basically, you evolve with that process. And through our study with Impact DAOs, what we've realized is that Impact DAOs really value relationships and just getting to know your community and having one-on-one conversations and just getting to know everybody. So I think the way Impact DAOs function, they function very differently, and their approach is more slow. They don't want to go fast. They want to move
Hmm.
fast and fix things. They want to move fast and fix things, not break things, unlike Facebook. But at the same time, they're very value aligned, and they know why they're in it together. They're in it together to do something good. And so it's very important that you get to know your community, because you all will be working together. It's not a protocol that will automate our decisions and stuff like that. Like, it's going to be very human coordinated, human oriented, very much knowing who the person is that you're working with. So I don't necessarily agree with Daniel. Maybe he's making a generalization. It's This tweet seems to be like a very it doesn't relate to all kinds of DAOs, basically what I mean to say.
Yep. Cool. All right. The last story for today is from quorummedia.xyz, written by Samantha Marin, who's been on the show and is one of our favorite authors. And the headline is Undesigning a DAO. I recently worked on a project to design the new Aragon delegated voting DAO. By the end of it, I was looking at DAOs in a completely different way, in a good way. This is a really cool article. So Samantha was involved in redesigning one of the top 20 DAOs by market cap, which is Aragon, which was one of the first DAO platforms. So it's like a DAO that governs a DAO tool, and a really important one. And I think it's really interesting, the analysis that Samantha has in this article. So first she goes into what she calls the sliding scale of organizations, where you look at all the different types of organizations that are out there, and you can kind of put them on a scale between bureaucracy and anarchy, where bureaucracy is like highly, highly, highly governed, process oriented, structured, have to do things the way that's predefined in every regard, versus on the opposite end of the scale is anarchy, where there's no rules and you do whatever you want to do. And so one example of bureaucracy is governments. And one example of anarchy is Burning Man festival. And then DAOs, it's like, are they in between? Are they in this weird middle ground? Are they trying to be like, which side are they trying to be on? And so then Samantha goes on to talk about, first of all, the pull of bureaucracy is very strong. That you often end up in a situation where you're doing some work and something goes wrong, and you say, "Oh man, like we should make a rule so that this thing doesn't go wrong again in the future, or we should change our governance so that this doesn't happen again in the future." And part of what she's describing is that you need to be careful about that. And the reason for that, which gets into the meat of what Samantha is arguing here, is that it's really important for DAOs to understand what they can enforce and what they cannot enforce. Because there are some rules that you can absolutely enforce by code or by law, and there are some rules that you absolutely cannot. And what she ends up arguing is that take the rules that you can enforce on a blockchain and make rules and enforce those, but then understands when you're making like more of a guideline or a practice, like a cultural element that you absolutely cannot enforce. And if you can't enforce it, don't try to enforce it. Right. So examples of things that fall under the enforceable by code or law side of her pyramid is what's the quorum for a vote? What's the pass rate for a vote? What are the laws in whatever jurisdiction you choose for your DAO that you absolutely have to follow? And then on the opposite end of the scale are practices. So things like being agile and having a social hour, and sub teams, like internal teams. How do they operate? How do they make decisions? Compensation, right? Where things are going to have to change over time. And so with their new model, what they've tried to do is say, okay, what are the things that can be automated and enforced on a blockchain? Let's build those into our DAO. And then what are the things that are outside of that scope? And let's leave those things out of our core governance, right? And so one of the things that she does is she actually quotes Vitalik Buterin again, saying that DAOs are automation at the center and human at the edges. So let the automation do what it's good at, and let the humans do what they're good at, which is be flexible and be anti-fragile, is a word that she uses, through their flexibility. So have the have the enforceable stuff enforced, and the human stuff, leave it to the humans.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of things she said, and I love the spectrum, like the approach from bureaucracy to anarchy. And I feel, and what you said, that there's a greater pull towards bureaucracy, is because DAOs are obsessed with this democratic decision making. They think because we have to decentralize power, we need to be extremely democratic. And if you look at democratic countries, like I come from one of the largest democratic country in the world, which is India, it is highly bureaucratic, right? Like, because now there are so much you have to do, like so much paperwork processes. And I started feeling the same in my DAO. Because I was totally new to the DAO world, and I launched as a DAO from the get go. And suddenly there are people in my DAO who have experiences working in other DAOs, and they come in like, hey, but why aren't we voting on this? I'm like, do we really need to take a vote on this? Like, we've taken a vote on the budget, which is the most important part, right? That's the fund allocation. Like, how should everybody get compensated? How should the budget be divided? I think that's the most important part. Now, moving on. Do we need to take vote on everything, like what should this color be, or what should like this questionnaire, like it would just waste so much time. And I just started feeling very frustrated. I'm like, wow, this is so bureaucratic. And I actually invited a panel on my podcast to talk about voting, like just how much voting is good voting. And then through a study, we had Klima DAO part of a study, and they launched as a DAO from day one, Klima, and they've learned important lessons around voting and just the whole bureaucratic nature, and then getting everybody to just vote on everything. And after almost a year of going through that up that chaos, the voting and the obsession with democracy, they've totally redesigned their org structure. They've redesigned their
Mm,
governance. That makes sense now. It didn't make sense before to have all the 100 people who had votes to vote on the logo. you know like it didn't
yeah.
make sense.
Yep.
Some of them don't even have the expertise. They don't have that visual
Yep.
aesthetics to be able to say, okay, this looks good, doesn't look good.
Yep. Yep. I love it. And budget is, I agree. It's a great thing. It fits into Samantha's model really well because blockchains are really good with money. And so it makes
Exactly,
sense
yeah.
that you would approve the budget on chain and then automatically distribute the budget, right, to the teams that need the money.
That's what
Yeah.
Gitcoin does. So we studied Gitcoin as part of a
Mm,
study, and Gitcoin has multiple levels of decision making. A lot of decision making is done off chain. So they will put out a proposal on Discourse, people discuss it on Discourse. Once they seem fit that the proposal should go up on Snapshot for voting, like if there's enough people supporting it, then after it's been discussed heavily on Discourse, it goes on Snapshot, where they take an off-chain vote, and after that it goes on Tally. And Tally is
mm,
the only automated part of their DAO, actually, because then Tally just disperses, like especially when it comes to fund allocation for the different work streams, and they have it almost every quarter because they run 4 quarterly grant rounds on on their platform. And so Tally just automatically disperses funds to the various work streams based on how the discussions took place on Snapshot. And Tally
yeah.
is basically the final on-chain automatic stuff in the DAO. Otherwise, everything is very human centered, and human coordinated.
Awesome. All right. That does it for the Just Dow It News Report. Thank you, Deepa, for joining us for that. And a reminder, everyone, please tune in again later in the week for the in-depth interview with Deepa. Deepa, where can people find you and the projects you've mentioned on the web and on social?
Oh, so we have published a book as a digital book as of moment, and it's available on impactdaos.xyz. That is impactdaos.xyz. They can also find us on our Twitter handle, impactdaos. These are the two places that we are really active on. And yeah, definitely go check out the book. We are very inspired by Balaji's model of keeping books alive and updated, and go digital first rather than go print, and treat books as an app, and keep issuing updates, because in crypto, like
Hmm.
1 day is equivalent to almost 5 years. So by the time you published your book, it's already outdated. So our book is stored as a code on GitHub, and we'll continuously make updates, and it'll automatically get updated on the website.
That's really cool. We're definitely going to dig into that later in the week. Sounds really interesting. And you can find me on Twitter at 0xthriller, or MyDAO is at MyDAODS. That's MIDAODS, or MyDAO.org. And to the audience, are you thinking about starting a DAO? Just DAO it.
Just DAO It is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Just DAO It does not contain any legal or financial advice. My DAO also does not provide legal or financial advice, and nor does your host, yours truly.